Which I'm excited to do and we will get to soon, we would like to share that the In the Know is a live expansion of the Here for the Girls annual health guide, a guide to caring for yourself. And that is published in conjunction with the Here for the Girls annual calendar that recognizes and shares the journeys of many young women facing a breast cancer diagnosis. So we welcome the most wonderful speakers this evening. We have a speaker from Riverside Health Systems, Sentara Health, Virginia Oncology Associates, Myriad Genetics, and VCU Massey Comprehensive Cancer Center to discuss vital, clinically relevant breast health and breast cancer information. Information presented in tonight's discussion is for educational purposes only. And for answers to specific healthcare questions and concerns, you should always consult with your healthcare provider. So to get us started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our wonderful list of panelists that we have this evening. So Dr. Lindsay Borden is from Riverside Health System, and she will be discussing how to be equipped for empowered health at any age. Dr. Borden is a fellowship-trained gynecologic oncology surgeon, board certified in obstetrics and gynecology. Dr. Borden specializes in treating GYN cancers with robotic and minimally invasive surgical techniques. Her experience includes treating endometrial, ovarian, cervical, and vulvar cancers. Dr. Borden values a collaborative approach, working closely with various team members to provide the best experience for her patients. A warm welcome to Dr. Borden. Dr. Sonia Hepburn is from Virginia Oncology Associates, and she will be discussing why we have unique treatment plans. Dr. Sonia Hepburn received her Bachelor of Science in Molecular Biology from Princeton University. She received her medical degree from the University of Southern California, where she also did her internship residency in internal medicine. She completed her hematology oncology fellowship at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She is an active member of the American Society of Clinical Oncology and the American Society of Hematology. She is trained in treating all cancer types with a special interest in breast, lung, and gastrointestinal cancers. Iris Lundy. Iris Lundy is from Sentara Health, and she will be discussing healthcare disparities. Iris Lundy is the inaugural Vice President of Health Equity from Sentara Health, a large integrated delivery health system headquartered in Norfolk, Virginia. Through her experience as both a nurse and healthcare administrator, she collaborates with leaders to develop and implement processes and practices which inform clinical performance, innovates community interventions, reduces barriers to care, and improves health outcomes. Welcome, Iris Lundy. Sarah Pass is from Myriad Genetics, and she will be discussing genetics and tumor testing. Sarah is a certified genetic counselor and medical science liaison with Myriad Genetics. She received her Master's of Medical Science in Human Genetics and Genetic Counseling from Emory University. After graduation, she worked as an oncology clinical genetic counselor at MD Anderson Cancer Center and the Medical University of South Carolina before joining Myriad Genetics over 5 years ago. In her current role as medical science liaison, she provides support and education to clinical providers surrounding hereditary cancer and somatic testing. Welcome, Sarah. And then we have Dr. Raphael Louie from VCU Massey Comprehensive Cancer Center, and he will be discussing new early technology how it significantly reduces the burden of lymphedema. Dr. Louie is a surgical oncologist at VCU Massey Comprehensive Cancer Center of Richmond. He recently completed an NIH T32 training grant in geriatric oncology at UNC, where he was working with mentors in medical oncology, geriatrics, and public health to implement patient-reported outcome measures to improve preoperative risk assessment in geriatric surgical oncology populations. His current research combines surgical oncology and public health interests to innovatively address disparities and to improve cancer care for the geriatric population. Finally, Dr. Louie has a clinical focus in the treatment of breast cancer. Welcome, Dr. Louie, and again, welcome to all of our panelists. So we are going to jump right into tonight's discussion because we have lots to cover. So we are going to start tonight's conversation with Riverside Health System and Dr. Borden. So Dr. Borden, welcome, and I wanted to provide you with a few moments to share anything that you would like for us to know about you or about Riverside.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you for having me. I am new to the area. I just joined Riverside in September, so I'm really excited to be meeting everybody in the area and especially everybody on this call. I am a GYN oncologist, so I don't deal with breast cancer directly, but we have a very close relationship because of our mutual patients that have genetic mutations that put them at risk for both cancers. And so I'll talk a little bit about that.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so on to our questions. So as our discussion today focuses on equipping oneself for empowered health at any age, and please let me know if you need me to repeat any of these questions. They are long. Could you share a bit more information regarding what empowered health is and why it is crucial to the overall well-being following a diagnosis?
So to me, empowered health is the idea that you're participating in your own health journey. And so you're armed with knowledge from your physician and you're kind of giving information back to your physician so that you're working together. And so a proactive approach really involves two main keys to your health. So it's knowing your body. So you know how it functions, you know what's supposed to work at different stages, and you have a strong relationship with your doctor. So having a primary care doctor is really important. A lot of women use their OBGYN, especially in this kind of young age, 20s, 30s, 40s, because many women don't have other health problems at this time. So your primary concerns are to do with your menstrual cycle and kind of other female changes. And so this is a great starting point. And this person can help explain not only what's normal at this age, but kind of help you fit into that picture. And knowing your body and specific changes around them will have you kind of have a tailored approach. So I want you to pay attention to patterns and issues, especially GI issues, menstrual issues, stress, breast health, and knowing all these symptoms and patterns and working with that person can help you achieve that.
Thank you so much for that information. That is extremely helpful. So now let's discuss the details of empowered cancer health a bit further. So could you now discuss what is best for your body?
In terms of breast health, the best thing you can know is what your breasts look like and feel like at baseline. So these are kind of knowing what your body is under any circumstances. So breast cancer, especially in young women, is often diagnosed by the patient themselves. Like they notice changes and bring it to their doctor's attention. So this can be breast lumps, lumps in your armpit, skin changes, any changes with your nipple, discharge. All those things would be something that you want to mention to your doctor. And if you don't know what's normal for you, it's hard to notice changes. So knowing your baseline is really important. And your OBGYN can be a starting point for where to go to get more information or to order tests if that's needed.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And it sounds like that can be applied not only to individuals that have not received a breast cancer, but also for individuals that maybe go back in for routine checkups or visits after they've received a breast cancer. So thank you. That's very, very helpful. Thank you very much. So Could you now discuss the importance of self-awareness? You've kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe just expand a little bit more about the importance of self-awareness regarding those changes that we just talked about.
Yes. So I think women should really pay attention to their menstrual cycle. It's actually very important as an indicator of your general health. So knowing the timing of when your period usually comes, how long it lasts, whether or not you experience cramps, how many tampons and pads you go through. All of these things help establish a pattern, and your menstrual cycle can reflect your general health. So noticing those changes is important. And I think also paying attention to stress is important. Women are particularly prone to ignoring our own health needs because we're prioritizing everybody else. We're prioritizing our family or our kids or our job. And so paying attention to how that stress affects us is really important. Figuring out how you best handle stress can help recognize those changes so that you're putting aside those other issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? That really, thank you for making the statement about stress, because you're absolutely right. And I think a lot of times we are stressed, and we can't slow down long enough to recognize that we are stressed. So thank you so much for bringing that very impactful statement to the table. So could you now provide some information regarding knowledge related to one's risk of cancer and characteristics that may increase one's overall risk?
So two things that can reduce your overall risk of cancer are to stop smoking if you smoke and to focus on maintaining a healthy weight. So quitting smoking is truly one of the hardest things you will ever do in your life. And so I always commend my patients that are able to stop smoking completely. It is really, really difficult, but it can really impact your overall risk. And even if you can't quit altogether, cutting back on the number of cigarettes can impact your health meaningfully. And then maintaining a healthy weight could be a whole other evening conference, but it's something that really impacts your cancer risk and a bunch of different cancers, but directly related to something that I see a lot, which is uterine cancer, and weight plays an important role in that. So being able to talk to your physician about those issues are important, and they can talk through support programs, counseling, medications, or even weight loss surgery if that's something that you're considering. So being proactive about these risk factors can help. And I think the other thing to consider is your family history, and knowing who in your family has cancer and updating that history as things change. Sometimes we mention it when we first meet a doctor, but then a mom or another family member may get diagnosed with cancer, and we don't bring up those changes to our physician.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So now can you talk a little bit about factors that are, and you kind of have touched on this somewhat, factors that are within one's control as it relates to risk of initial diagnosis, and for a lot of our members that we have, re-diagnosis?
So, on-time screening is a big thing in terms of initial diagnosis. So, we hear a lot about pap smears, we hear a lot about mammograms, and we hear a lot about colonoscopies. And those are because those three are the big screening mechanisms that we can help catch cancers early, or prevent them from ever occurring in the first place. So, being on time with those screenings, kind of you being aware of when they're due, putting them on the calendar, even if they alert in a year or two, can be really important. And then again, like I talked about the risk of cancer in your family. So I take care of a lot of women who've been diagnosed with a genetic mutation that might put them at risk for breast or ovarian cancer or other things. And knowing about those risks, knowing who's eligible for testing, and kind of reviewing those with your doctor can help, because we can actually help impact the prevention of cancer, which is always our goal.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And then the final question is, could you discuss, and you've talked about this earlier, could you discuss feelings of anxiety, becoming overwhelmed, and loss of control?
Yes. So women struggle with this throughout their diagnosis, kind of no matter what of cancer they're experiencing. And it can hit at any time. People always think that it's the beginning of treatment or hearing about the diagnosis that's going to be the worst. But I've had patients who actually their surveillance visits are when it comes to be really an anxiety inducing moment. They're walking into the oncologist's office and they don't know what's going to be found. And so I think talking about this with your physician is really important. I know it may not help directly in the moment, but most women feel this way. So everyone has some degree of anxiety about coming to the oncologist's office. And I think recognizing that is really important. There's all different things that can help. Counseling can help, connecting with other patients can help. Sometimes your doctor, especially if you don't speak English as a native language, they might be able to connect you with another member in your community who has the same diagnosis and would be willing to talk through those things in something where you can kind of easily connect. And so reaching out and talking to your doctor, we always want to help. We think about you a lot too. So we want you to feel a little bit relieved about coming to the oncologist and be able to work with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Borden. Thank you so much for all of that very impactful information. And I know that those were a lot of questions. So thank you for hanging in there with me. I appreciate it. So if you have questions for Dr. Borden, go ahead and jot them down. And then as we get to the end, please feel free to put them in the chat. So that way we can discuss this topic a bit further. Thank you again so much. Is there anything else, Dr. Borden, before we move on that you would like to add?
No, thank you.
All right. So next, we have Dr. Hepburn from Virginia Oncology Associates. So thank you so much, Dr. Hepburn, for joining us this evening. So Dr. Hepburn, would you like to say anything about the work that you do or about Virginia Oncology Associates?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. So I've been now with Virginia Oncology Associates for the past 3 years. It's flown by really quickly. But during my time there, so as you mentioned, one of my interests is breast cancer, and I do see a lot of breast cancer patients, particularly young ones. And in seeing them and them telling me about Here for the Girls is what prompted me to be part of Here for the Girls and take a more active role in it. I see the impact that it does on a day-to-day basis. So I really value that and want to be part of that as well. And one of the things that I'm also trying to do with VOA is trying to incorporate a lot more clinical trials so that patients have the newest cutting edge research right at their back door, essentially, so that they don't have to travel other places and they feel like they're getting the very best medical care available. So that's something that we're striving for.
Thank you so much. Wow, that is very important work that you guys are doing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So, as our discussion today focuses on managing treatment side effects and what makes each person unique, which I think is such a really important topic, and thank you for bringing that to light. Could you discuss the unique circumstances surrounding physician recommendations for a lumpectomy versus the mastectomy? We get this all the time, this discussion.
So it's a great question. And I think, as you mentioned, it's a very individualized decision where there are a couple of separate factors that we take into consideration before making that. And of course, it's always part of a multidisciplinary team where we get together to try to make this decision and help the patient come up with the final outcome. So a couple of things that we take into consideration. One of them is the size of the tumor. So if it's a small tumor, it's more likely to be able to have a lumpectomy versus a mastectomy. And historically, it used to be people used to say more is better, and they used to do bilateral mastectomies, and they would have these really long-term morbidities. And so now we're trying to say less is more, actually. They've done many studies to compare lumpectomy and radiation versus doing mastectomies, and they have very similar outcomes. And the benefit of doing the lumpectomy is that they recover quicker, so they have less side effects. And so overall, we are preferring doing the lumpectomy and radiation versus just doing the mastectomy. But if they have a very large tumor, depending on that compared to the size of the breast, that might be a reason for having a mastectomy. If they have a genetic risk, so if they carry the BRCA mutation, that increases their likelihood of having a separate primary tumor. And in those situations, we also recommend doing bilateral mastectomy. If for some reason they're not able to undergo radiation, if they're pregnant, for instance, or have a lot of different types of autoimmune conditions or a certain mutation that doesn't allow them to do radiation, or they've had radiation before, then we think of mastectomy. So we take several factors into consideration when coming up with the right diagnosis and treatment options for them.
Wow, Dr. Hepburn, thank you so much. Several of those I had not even thought of. So thank you for that discussion. That was wonderful. So regarding treatment, chemotherapy was recommended prior to surgery for some, while surgery was recommended first for others. Yes. So what individual circumstances do physicians consider when making this recommendation?
So you're right. So historically, it used to be everybody would go to surgery first. But nowadays, we know that there are certain tumor types that actually do better with doing chemotherapy beforehand. So we call that neoadjuvant or treatment before surgery. So those patients are HER2 positive patients and triple negative breast cancer patients. Now, when we're talking about surgery, I'm referring to stages 1 to 3, where it's still a curable option. Once it's at a stage 4, unfortunately, that's no longer the case. But for those stages 1 to 3 that are HER2 and triple negative, doing chemotherapy up front is actually very beneficial. So it allows us to do a couple of things. So one, it helps us downstage the disease. So if they have lymph nodes involved or a large tumor, it allows for shrinkage of that initially so that by the time they get to surgery, it's not as an invasive an approach, and oftentimes can help with preventing lymphedema. So that's the swelling that people can get when they have many lymph nodes that need to be removed. So that's one benefit of getting that done. Another one is it helps us understand the biology of the disease type so that if they have a great response with the treatments that we give up front at the time of surgery, if they reach a complete response, that's a prognostic thing that tells us they have a better likelihood of having better long-term outcomes, as opposed to if they still have disease after we gave them the best treatment we could. And it also tells us that then that means that adjuvant treatment or treatment after surgery might need to change so that we can give them better outcomes down the line. So there's a variety of reasons why we would choose to do that up front. And so that has changed in the last 5-10 years or so.
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, you've brought up several things that were really important, that were really important points that I had not thought of. So thank you again for bringing that to the table. Okay, so as a follow-up, what unique factors are considered regarding post-initial treatment when recommending long-term care and prevention of reoccurrence?
So I think when we're thinking about treatment afterwards as adjuvant treatment is what we call it when it's treatment after doing the surgery. So that includes a variety of things such as radiation or hormonal therapy for those patients that are estrogen and progesterone positive. They're the ones that are going to take, likely it's a pill of sorts that would usually be for about 5 years. If they were more high risk, then we also think of something like ovarian suppression for young women, if that's something that's a concern. And then for those that are HER2 positive, they usually are on treatment for at least a year that targets that HER2 mutation, or triple negative breast cancer. Nowadays, if they're in those early stages, they're usually doing immune therapy for a total of a year. So those are all the things that we're thinking of long term. And of course, other things, just survival, lifestyle modifications that was previously mentioned, just to make sure that we decrease the risk of a recurrence as much as we can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all of those great points. So regarding genetic testing results, what role is played in treatment and long-term care recommendations?
So as I previously mentioned, genetic testing is very, very, very important for our patients, especially those that are diagnosed before the age of 50. Those automatically now get tested. People that have triple negative breast cancer, it's going to be very important, not only because it'll tell us As I mentioned earlier, if you have a BRCA mutation, it's more likely that we then recommend bilateral mastectomy because it can reduce a risk by up to 90%, which then tells us about what type of surgery someone might have. But for triple negative breast cancers in particular, it also gives us another treatment option because if they have that BRCA mutation, then it can tell us about either the type of chemotherapy that we can offer because they're more sensitive to platinum drugs, or there's also another treatment called a PARP inhibitor that we might be able to offer. So it actually does impact their treatment. And I say that because sometimes people say, oh, I don't have kids, it's not going to impact anyone else, or I don't keep in touch with family and it's not going to affect anyone else. But it actually does have personal impact as well. And then doing genetics, as you mentioned before, other people have mentioned before too, is that it not only tells us about breast cancer risk, but it also tells us about other cancer risk as well. So a lot of these mutations usually also tell us about the risk for ovarian cancer, colon, prostate, pancreas, and melanoma. Those are the cancers that tend to correlate together. So as I said before, prevention is best. And so trying to do the genetics will help inform us with all of these things to try to keep people healthy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, could you explain how physician collaboration plays a crucial role in the development of an individual's care plan? That's the first part. And I can repeat the second part again if you need it. Could you also discuss which physicians might be involved in the decision-making process? So one is the role of physician collaboration, and two is what physicians might collaborate for that decision-making process.
So it's very crucial that we all collaborate together. This is definitely a multidisciplinary team approach, and it includes everyone from the very first pathologist to the very first radiologist that encountered the breast cancer. Once someone gets a diagnosis of breast cancer, usually the physicians that are involved are a surgical oncologist, a radiation oncologist, and a medical oncologist. And so each facility has a tumor board where we all meet together and discuss each patient's unique characteristics, their medical history, and social determinants that might impact the type of treatment that we ultimately recommend. Because if somebody doesn't have the correct social support, we can help with transportation and extra things to just make sure that they have the best outcome possible. And so all of those people play a role, and we all have each other's cell phone numbers. We're very close. And so it's very, very important that you have a team that knows how to collaborate together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So the next question is, how does one's ethnicity and age of diagnosis impact treatment and long-term care recommendations?
So in triple negative breast cancer, we find that it tends to be more of Black population that tends to have triple negative breast cancer. And within triple negative breast cancer, there's a higher likelihood, probably up to 10 to 15% of patients that tend to have a genetic mutation with BRCA1 and 2. And so we tend to keep that in the back of our mind, especially in trying to do the genetic testing and trying to do more high risk screening for patients. Age of diagnosis also matters. So oftentimes when they're diagnosed at a very young age, usually 30s, 40s, they tend to have more high risk disease. And we tend to be a little bit more aggressive about doing chemotherapy. And so also that comes with another thing that we have to keep in mind. And so when someone gets a diagnosis of cancer and they know they have to do treatment and chemo, they say, okay, great, let's sign me up. Let's go ahead and do this. They do their fight or flight mode. And then we think, okay, we also have to think long-term you. And so we have to think of fertility preservation. And that's also very key and very important, which is sometimes very hard to do because at the time you're thinking, I need to survive this, not whether or not you're going to have a baby. And there are those conversations that you're going to have with a spouse. Do you have a spouse? Is that something for your future? So there are so many questions, but being diagnosed at a young age comes with that added layer where we do have to address, and it's very important to address up front. On the other hand, someone diagnosed much later in life, I have some patients that are in their 90s, where we consider, if they're healthy, they could do a lumpectomy alone and we can omit radiation or hormone therapy where they don't have to take something every day, and doing surgery alone might be something. So taking age into consideration really does play a role into the ultimate treatment that we recommend.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And your final question, thank you for hanging in there, is could you discuss managing treatment side effects? And I know that could be a whole discussion in and of itself, but managing treatment side effects and the impacts on the other aspects of a patient's life, such as their mental health or their sexual health.
So that's a very good question, and it's different for different people. Oftentimes, I know that I mentioned before, if someone's high risk and they're young, sometimes we have to recommend ovarian suppression where we have to just block the ovaries altogether. So that might mean making someone who's in their 30s go through menopause in their 30s, and that comes with the hot flushes, vaginal dryness, and all that stuff that can impact them. And unfortunately, we don't have great things to help with some of that. I know that people have tried herbal medications, but sometimes it's effective, sometimes it's not. Venlafaxine is one of the medications that we've gone to help with those that have really severe side effects. Vaginal dryness is something that we also consider because we're inducing that with some of our medications. And so just being open and telling us about it is a great start, because I feel like oftentimes it's just not brought up. So we don't think of asking it all the time. And so there are good things that we can do, such as water-based lubricants, coconut oil, vitamin E supplements, etc., that we can try to at least tell you about and coach you about before, so that you don't have to suffer through it alone. So I'm sure there are many, many other possible side effects. Peripheral neuropathy is a common one with our treatments as well. And so trying to coach people on how to cope with all of that is going to be very important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Such great information that you shared. So thank you very much for sharing all of that. So if you have any questions, please, you can either put them in the chat now and we'll review them, or you can hold on to them and put them in at the end. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we have Sarah Pass from Myriad Genetics. So Sarah, do you want to share anything about yourself or about Myriad before we get started?
Yeah, so I'll kind of explain a little bit about what a genetic counselor is. It's something that I feel like we've heard here and there, but maybe not everyone is familiar. So a genetic counselor is a specially trained medical professional who is there to help patients understand what genetic testing is, and what that genetic testing result can mean for them. As Dr. Borden and Dr. Hepburn have said, there's a lot of components that come out of having a genetic result and can change a lot of things for a patient. So we're really there to help the patient understand what all of that means. It's already a confusing time when you get a diagnosis, much less when you learn you also have a genetic syndrome. So we're there to kind of help you figure all of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And it's interesting because one of the questions in the chat is going to be answered during your session. So, all right. So to get us started, could you share a bit more? You actually kind of already answered this, but if you could share in a bit more detail the role of genetic testing that genetic testing plays in both treatment and testing in relation to family members.
Yeah, absolutely. So genetic testing, kind of what we're talking about right now are changes that are in every single cell of the body. Having a change or mutation in one of those genes can increase a patient's risk for not only one cancer, but multiple cancers. And as Dr. Hepburn said, they can be a range of different kinds of cancers. And so knowing if a patient has a change in one of these genes allows us to understand what is that patient's individualized risk. So as they have mentioned so far along, BRCA1 and 2 has a number of cancers associated with it. We would definitely want to talk with that patient about different surgery options and screening options that are available to them. But there are a lot of genes that we test for now pretty regularly, and they all have their own individual risk for breast cancer and other cancers. And so knowing which of those genes helps us understand which path that patient might need to go down and which additional treatment options may be available to them. And for their families, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead. No.
Okay. And so for their families, we also like to know that there is a genetic mutation in the family or genetic change, because those close relatives, we often call them first-degree relatives, which are siblings, parents, children, also have a 50% risk to have that same genetic change. And so if we can catch these patients and their families before they ever have cancer, we can do preventative options for them, whether that's increased screening, whether that is they choose to go through prophylactic surgery before they ever have cancer. It lets us have that patient have an informed decision-making process of what screenings and choices they want to make forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was a very, very good description. So can you share a bit more about what options a patient would have following genetic testing results?
Yeah, so this is all going to depend on which gene they have that change or mutation in. So as Dr. Hepburn and Dr. Borden mentioned, if you have a BRCA1 and 2 mutation, we may choose to do either increased breast screening, or for our patients with breast cancer, and they may choose to do a bilateral mastectomy. They're going to be watched very closely for gynecological cancers as well as other cancers associated with the syndrome. But some of the other genes like PALB2 or ATM have other cancer risks associated with them. And so we want to follow those patients very, very closely for the cancers associated with them, whether that's pancreatic cancer screening, colon cancer screening, and it lets us kind of pick which prophylactic screenings or surgeries we can do for them, or what options we need to make available to them.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So this is always a hard one. Can we discuss variants of unknown significance? What do you do with that?
Yes, everyone's least favorite answer to come back on a genetic result. Because essentially that result means we're not really sure. We found a change, but we don't really know what it means. We don't know if it's increasing that risk for cancer or not. As the name insinuates, it's unknown significance. For these variants, we often treat them as if they're negative. We treat the patient based on family and personal history of cancer because we don't know exactly what that change means. We all have genetic changes that make us different from everyone else. And sometimes we find them in these genes that can increase the risk for cancer. But until we see these variants more often or have more evidence on them, we don't want to put anyone through any screenings or surgeries that they don't need. And so for that reason, that's why we treat them as if they had a negative result. But we do watch these variants over time. I definitely recommend, if you have a VUS or a variant of uncertain significance on your genetics report, keep in contact with your physician who did your genetic testing, or with your genetic counselor that did your genetic testing, because they're the ones that are going to get that alert when it changes. The vast majority of them are going to come out to be negative, but a few of them do turn out to be positive down the road, and those are the patients we want to make sure don't slip through the cracks, and we get those answers for them as that changes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So a term that not all of us have heard about, can you share a little bit more about somatic testing?
Absolutely. So all the gene changes that I've been talking about, or mutations that I've been talking about so far, are changes that are in every single cell of our body. They're tested for on blood or spit. But something that's coming more into, I think, patients' understanding is something called somatic testing, or testing of the tumor. You can have the same mutations that we would see in germline or hereditary cancer testing in the tumor, but unlike the mutations that we see in every single cell of the body that can be passed on from one generation to the next, have increases for multiple cancers, changes in the tumor don't have those same risks. It's solely in the tumor. They don't have an increased risk for other cancers. They can't pass that on to other generations, to their family. So knowing that is really important. As Dr. Hepburn mentioned, clinical trials are really important, and sometimes those answers from somatic testing let us know which clinical trials that patient can go on to. It can also give us additional treatment options, but knowing those differences between a germline and a somatic report are very, very important, and something that definitely I encourage patients to understand just a little bit more. And if you don't understand, go find your local genetic counselor. We'll happy to talk about it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So this relates to one of the questions that was listed in the chat. Could you share how often one should get retested?
Yeah, so the nice thing about genetics is they generally don't change over time. So the germline hereditary cancer testing that you had before, those answers will be the same as they ever were. They should be consistent. But what does change is the number of genes we know about and the specific regions of those genes that we test. So while we don't recommend that you necessarily need to have the same genes tested, we do recommend update testing as we learn more genes, as we learn how we need to change testing. All of those are going to change over time. So I would certainly say keep up with your physician. Ask them if it's been 3-5 years since your last genetic testing. Do I need to do update testing? Do I need to look into these results again, do we need to talk to the lab of, do we need to do any additional testing, either based on their history or their family history, or even just more knowledge that we didn't have before? My general cutoff, and I do say general because this is really going to depend on what panel the patient had, what lab the testing was done through, but generally around 2017. If your testing is before that, I definitely recommend talking with your physician of maybe we should do update testing, but always just kind of keep in contact and let those physicians know that you're interested and things may have changed.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's a great recommendation. And then finally, could you share when you should consider having a family member receive a test?
Yeah, so most of these hereditary cancer syndromes don't affect anyone until they're adults. We don't see these cancer risks until someone is in their mid-20s, 30s or so, or maybe even later. So we typically recommend testing for family members once there is a known genetic mutation is when someone's at least 18, somewhere between 18 and 25 when that screening is going to start. But there are always caveats. Some families have cancer showing up much earlier. And so for those patients, we would recommend testing earlier. And there are, unfortunately, some genetic syndromes that have cancer risks in childhood and some even in infancy. And so if one of those syndromes do appear on a report, we do recommend testing much earlier, but generally we're going to be looking at testing adults once they're at least 18.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. Such wonderful information to consider. Thank you very much. And if you have additional questions for Sarah, feel free to put them in the chat and we will scroll through, or you can hold them until the end. Thank you again, Sarah. Okay. So next we have from Sentara Health, Iris Lundy. Welcome, Iris. Iris, what would you like to share about yourself or about Sentara?
Well, I've been with Sentara 21 years, and that's been pretty amazing. Sentara has been very intentional with working with our communities. I think that's the other piece. And while we have hospitals across the state, for those who might be in Hampton Roads, we do have the Sentara Brock Cancer Center that is local.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Iris. So Iris, as our discussion today focuses on healthcare disparities, such an important topic, could you discuss further, that despite reported declining breast cancer death rates since 1990, all cities in Hampton Roads exceed the Healthy People 2030 target for age-adjusted death rate due to breast cancer?
Yeah, this is an excellent topic for us to be talking about today for many reasons, because when you think about disparities, differences, what are some of those things that keep us from being able to get access to screenings? I think screenings is very important, but if you don't know you need a screening, when you need the screening, if you can't get off work to get to the screening, that becomes a problem. If there's a cost associated with it, and even if it's not, but you don't know it's not a cost, that becomes a barrier also. I mean, there are things like bias, whether that bias is conscious or unconscious, it impacts us also. And then if you start to think about geographical, right? Do I have the transportation to get wherever that is? So access is big and knowledge is big also, because even if I have access to care, if I don't understand when I need to get a screening or the importance of screening, that may deter me and I may get a late diagnosis from that. So we've got to do a better job with getting out to the community and making these things happen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Iris. Such important information to bring to the table this evening. Thank you again. So in your discussion, you have mentioned that in order to find cancers early, you recommend 2 programs, including mobile 3D mammography and a high-risk program. Could you discuss the benefits of these programs a bit further?
Sure. So 3D mammography, very important. Again, when we're out in the community, we need to be able to take care to where the patient is. There's a lot of factors that keep a community member from getting this needed resource. One of those barriers is access. So if we take that mammography, the mobile one to the person, that's great. Now, there are some who can come to our traditional buildings, and that's great also. So when you think about mobile mammography, there were three things that I kind of jotted down. One, I can go directly to the neighborhoods or communities, right? So that helps with your access and geography. If we're using a 3D van, it's more accurate with its images and it's more efficient with diagnosis, which is a plus for our communities. But also it lowers the need for additional mammograms, which is a benefit to our patients. So we definitely need that. So whether I can go to a traditional place or I need a mobile van to come to a community that has difficulty trying to get to a place, that becomes a win-win for us. The other thing that we mentioned was the high-risk breast cancer program. That's important because everyone, I was doing another talk somewhere else, and we talked about a storm, right? Everyone may be in the same storm, but not everyone's in the same boat. So when you think about that, everyone doesn't have the same risk. So how do we help you identify your risk and be proactive in that so that we can help you with your quality of life, reducing this or even preventing, right? And so there are certain things that we can do. I heard the speaker before talk about genetic counseling and testing and all of that. You get that with this, you get clinical breast exams and education. And, I want to take a second to kind of hit education, because sometimes when I'm out in the community, I have women and men who say, I didn't know that I needed this. No one has stopped to explain why I need this. They might say, oh, go get a breast exam, but they haven't explained the why behind it. And so a lot of the things that we're trying to do is not only identify where the need is, but now let's work with our community partners to do that education. And so that's what I mean when I talk about us being intentional in some of these spaces and getting into the community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Iris, for sharing that information. And I really like these different points that you've brought to the table. So thank you very much. And there was a statement that you said. I was going to ask you to say it again, Iris. But now it has slipped my mind. What was the statement that it'll come to me, and I'll bring it back to our discussion in a moment. Okay, so could you share a bit more, and you've kind of already touched on this, but just take it a little bit further, a bit more about how these programs address healthcare disparities within the community. So taking that discussion just a bit further.
Sure. So let's say you don't have insurance, right? And if you don't have insurance, you may think that you cannot get a screening. Well, you can. There are services out there that connect to help you all for people to be able to get a cancer screening. So if we got the mobile van in your neighborhood and you want to get it, usually we have a QR code where people can sign up, or we're working with a community partner who they're out passing out flyers and say, hey, here's why you need it, and here's where you can come and get it. And so that is going to be very important, because so if you don't have insurance, we are reducing that barrier. If you don't have the money, there are programs that are set up where they are either at no cost or low cost for people to be able to get that, whether that's in a traditional place or that 3D. And the same thing with the high risk, right? If you get a mammogram and you are told you are high risk, or someone in your family has had it, you're concerned, well, let's help you get in the door and speak to the right people. I know everyone is concerned about cost, but my thing is this: we'll help you figure out cost. Let's just get you in the door and get you the right services so we can give you the care that you need. Those are the two main things we need to do. And I know for us, you can go to high risk breast program, Sentara.com, and you can find more information on that. And you can go to mobile mammo at Sentara.com to get more information about the mammogram. Somebody standing by to talk to you.
Absolutely. So first, that leads us into our last question. But second, I thought of the piece I wanted to say. we might all be in the same storm, but not always in the same boat, correct?
That's right. We're not in the same boat.
Right. And I just really appreciate that statement. So thank you so much, which really leads very nicely into this last question. And that is, could you share a bit more information about how individuals can access these programs? It sounds like you have already done that. But I would love it. I'd love to put that information in the chat too. So I'm going to mute myself if you can give us that information, and I'm going to put it in the chat right now.
Yes. So if you go to High Risk Breast Program, Sentara.com, you'll find that one. And if you go to Mobile Mammo at Sentara.com, you can talk to someone and they can help you with both of those. And if for some reason that's not working for you, you can stop by or call the Sentara Brock Cancer Center. We have navigators there. There's always someone to help you get the information you need.
Excellent. So High Risk Breast Program, and would it be at Sentara.com?
You could, if you just put like a space and then Sentara.com in parentheses, even if they just do High Risk Breast Program, it's going to come up.
And then
the other one is, yes, Mobile Mammo at Sentara.com for that one.
Okay.
And then someone will get back with them.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you very much. Anything else, Iris, before we move on to our last panelist for this evening?
I will say this, we've had an incredible partnership with those in the community. And I think if we're going to move the needle on this, it will take all of us coming together and working as one. And so I'm excited about the partnerships that are across with the panelists that are here, but also with those in the community, whether they're advocates or community-based organizations who are helping us fight this fight.
Thank you, Iris. I think that right now, community partnerships and healthcare partnerships are essential. I agree with you 100%. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now we have Dr. Louie from VCU Massey Comprehensive Cancer Center. So Dr. Louie, welcome. Is there anything that you would like to share about yourself or about VCU before we get started?
Oh, thank you. And it's been a pleasure to be able to be part of this. I think it's an exciting time for us here at Massey as well, since we've become comprehensive cancer status, as you said, with introductions, which I think is a huge benefit, hopefully, for collaborating across within communities, what Ms. Lundy discussed. I think that's the only way we can really take care of folks and help with disparities, but with comprehensive cancer status brings opportunities for research and clinical trials and opening opportunities for all our patients in the community and at Massey as well.
Thank you so much. Yes, congratulations on that new distinction. So we're going to jump right into your questions because there are several of them. So thank you for bearing with me. So could you, as our discussion today focuses on new early detection technology, could you provide a bit more information regarding the technology and the role Massey has played in the development?
Yeah, I think as I was going through some of the questions, I think we're talking a little bit about lymphedema is probably one thing that we could talk about. But just briefly, what is lymphedema? I think Dr. Hepburn kind of mentioned this as well, right? I think utilizing personalized treatments allows us to maybe minimize some of those risks, but lymphedema is still something that's real. And I think the great part is with early detection, that means we're treating breast cancers earlier. Part of that algorithm as we take care of folks is to make sure we have adequate staging, and that's where the role surgery might play. Even though we take care of the primary tumor, we just need to make sure that these cancer cells might not escape somewhere. The way we do that is through a process of sampling lymph nodes at the time of surgery, typically 1 to 3 lymph nodes. And what we do is that's removing lymph nodes as part of our immune system, where our immune cells run back and forth, but they're also part of our defense mechanism against cancer from spreading elsewhere. So we're trying to peek to make sure they're not hiding there. The risks with that is when we remove a lymph node, it creates a little roadblock for our lymphatic channels to flow back to the heart. And that can lead to, if it's progressing further, what we talk about arm swelling or arm heaviness, which folks usually feel first beforehand. And as we talk about breast cancer, the goal is to really get to patients through survivorship. And this is really important because as we have younger patients as well as older patients, that could really impact what they do for their jobs, how they take care of themselves. And so any ways that we could reduce those risks is important. One of my partners, Dr. McGuire, was instrumental in one of the trials that was performed nationally called the PREVENT trial that was using early detection methods. Previously, historically, to detect lymphedema, it's something that we would see patients in surveillance between myself, the medical oncologist, the radiation oncologist, just kind of asking these questions of, does your arm feel heavier? Is there any swelling, or just looking on a clinical exam? Now, when we talk about sentinel lymph node biopsies, that risk is pretty low. It's 4 to 5%, but that's a real percentage if someone's got that. And so we have to look for ways to reduce that. Typically, we would follow clinically by measurements of the arm, but sometimes it's not as accurate or picking up early. So using new technologies like bioimpedance spectroscopy, which is using small electrical waves to really kind of conduct on a scale to really pick up changes early, allows us to intervene early. And again, it goes into a multidisciplinary approach by working with our occupational therapists and physical therapists to work together. And what we found in these trials is that early detection before they're clinically apparent, we can actually reduce the risk of progression and sometimes reduce that by up to close to 60%. So any ways that we can use early detection, that will be really important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that in-depth explanation. So I have a question for you that you've kind of already answered, but if you have anything you want to add to it. So could you explain how this new technology could change or detect long-term symptoms, which I think you've already addressed, related to lymphedema following lymph node removal?
Yeah, and so I think the nice part, typically we would think about following with clinical exams and asking, but we want to catch this before patients even have symptoms. And what some of these machines can do, they're just like a scale that we have in our office where we would actually get baseline measurements on the reader and follow over time in surveillance visits. If we notice any changes early, we get patients infitted for compression stockings or garments and physical therapy. And the neat part is, as you look at these clinical trials, is that early intervention just with compressions actually prevents even needing further physical therapy interventions potentially down the road. And that's the goal, is we want to make sure that our patients are living beyond breast cancer, right? Our survivors, that we're not impeding what they're doing, what's really keeping them going. And I think that's key. And the really neat part is having this available at Massey allows us to really think creatively about taking care of patients in terms of interventions, and also hopefully ways that we could actually use that information to really care for patients on a broader basis.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes. And I really appreciate what you said about patients being able to live their life right after these treatments. So thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. So could you briefly discuss, well, again, you've answered this one already, but if you have anything else to add, could you briefly discuss how this could impact the overall well-being of those facing a cancer diagnosis?
Sure. I think it's really important, because I think some of the things that we all talk about to patients is that it's not just focusing on the fight of fighting cancer at the time of diagnosis, but really focusing on survivorship, because I think that's where we can get, and there's just so much that we've learned about breast cancer and caring for patients, and survivorship's key. I think inhibiting the things that they could do from day to day, I think, is important as we think about our discussions during surgery, what surgical options we may have. And prevention of lymphedema or reducing those risks is just as important, not just for younger patients, but as I think for my older patients too, as they, what might be barriers in terms of taking care of themselves, because lymphedema can impede that in terms of daily function, can impede jobs as well. And I think those are things that we want to reduce.
Absolutely. So are there any considerations that when making a decision whether to utilize certain technology such as this with a patient? For example, would there be patients that you would not recommend this be used for?
Sure. I think the patients that I would not recommend are patients that we aren't actually performing lymph node surgery on. I think is one way that we'll think about, right? Because we're not really intervening on the nodes. But there may be some caveats behind this as well. We do know that sometimes women that do get radiation, there is a slightly increased risk of lymphedema. But I think anytime that we can use it for prevention, we would be able to do that. Obviously, for benign processes or diseases, we shouldn't be doing this. But anyone that's considering lymph node surgery or potentially radiation as well, this is one way that we could really use this to hopefully improve and minimize the impacts of lymphedema in the future.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So if you can discuss a couple, 2 or 3 additional innovations in cancer care that might be being developed or considered at VCU right now.
Yeah, I think it's really neat to hear everyone else talk before me, because I feel like they've been able to kind of talk about where we are moving in directions for cancer care, right? In terms of personalized care. Sarah mentioned using somatic genetic testing and molecular testing. We have a couple clinical trials using that to really match up in terms of different types of cancer care after surgery or for treating the whole body. I think that's one of the directions that we're moving forward. And I think also one of the big missions at Massey is to really think about cancer equity and disparities, and really using population data to really kind of guide that in terms of looking ways to innovatively care for patients across socioeconomic statuses.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then you bring us back to the point that Iris was talking about earlier, that everyone connecting together all these different pieces. So finally, is there a place where individuals can go to learn about new cancer treatments, technology, or testing that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. Good question. Just because there's just so much out there now on the internet, and where it can get overwhelming where to look. I think I would strongly recommend, heavily vetted cancer sites, especially the American Cancer Society, so cancer.org. And then in terms of looking for clinical trials, even looking at cancer.gov, we could look at clinical trials there. But I think with your local cancer centers, through either Massey or Sentara or any of the cancer centers throughout Virginia, I think those are pretty good sites that really have availability to look at what's available in terms of clinical trials. I think that's always key, to look for ways that we can take care of folks as best as we can.
Thank you so much. And I'll be putting those recommendations in the chat. Dr. Louie, is there anything else you'd like to add before we move into our question and answer period? Did we lose you, Dr. Louie? Oh, no. Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, and for sticking with me, because I know that was a lot of questions. So thank you. So now I want to, again, just really genuinely thank our speakers. They are very busy, as we know, addressing the needs of so many individuals facing a cancer diagnosis. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us this evening. I know it is deeply appreciated.